Hey, it's Dean here, your instructor for History 103, and I just want to take a little bit of time and chat about the chapter that you're going to be reading and exploring this week, week 5, and that is chapter 23, Modern Industry and Mass Politics 1870 to 1914. And once you grab your book, because we'll kind of flip through some of the pages here as I highlight some of the important sections. Many of them related to the discussion boards that you'll be involved with this week. Yes, it's another discussion week, just like last week was. So when historians talk about the Industrial Revolution, they really talk about Industrial Revolution 1 and Industrial Revolution 2, or Part 1 and Part 2, Phase 1, Phase 2. So we already talked about kind of Part 1 Industrial Revolution. And that's kind of focused on coal, all right, as this kind of major news source fueling the Industrial Revolution and changes in Europe. And the kind of primary industry that is impacted by coal and the Industrial Revolution, textiles, all right, clothing. Well, when we get to Industrial Revolution number 2, which is kind of the second half of the 19th century, as the book points out, it's about changes in scope, scale, and steel. And when we think about scope, talking about sort of changes that are not limited to just textiles, and it's not as if Industrial Revolution Part 1 was just limited to textiles, but that was the major kind of industry that was impacted. What we see during Industrial Revolution Part 2 is just this changes across industries, right? Construction is really kind of a major one, but change across the industries. And then changes in scale. And you can see a kind of a great example of that on page 761, in that image on page 761. And just the scale of the items that the humans are working on, right? I mean, you can see that these are kind of, looks like they're big, huge wheels that may be used in electricity generation. And, looks like the radius of one of those wheels, is similar to the height of a human being. So, we're no longer, dealing with, thimbles and spinning jennies, but just a massive change in scale. And then the third item is steel. Excuse me. Steel had been around and had been made for centuries, but the big change that happens in the 19th century is the creation of the Bessemer process. And basically, the benefit of the Bessemer process was the ability to create just massive vats of liquid steel that could then be poured into a variety of molds. Think about the sorts of structural steel that are required for skyscrapers. It's the Bessemer process that makes those sorts of things possible. So when you think about Industrial Revolution Part 2, think about changes in scale, scope, and then steel. Pushing on, of course, changes in industry are going to facilitate changes in business as well too, and so the book talks about an increase in credit and consumerism. And there is a primary document in here talking about the department store. I think it's by Emile Zola. That'll be one of the primary documents that you might write on this week. But the department store is basically invented during this period of time, which of course facilitates consumerism. And a couple reasons why this happens. One is that the Industrial Revolution, both 1 and 2, and increase in urbanization just boosts the number of individuals who can pursue a middle-class job, right? Which means that you're going to have some disposable income. Of course, if it's disposable income, you got to dispose it on something. Also, these individuals are able to enjoy predictable income. All right, so this isn't income that depends on the seasons. All right, if you get enough rain, if you're a farmer, right, this is predictable sorts of income. If you're working in a business, clerk, that kind of thing, an office job, it's fairly predictable. That means that you can buy things on credit. All right, it's a pretty safe assumption that the job that you have now, all right, you're going to have next year. In fact, you might even have a better job next year, which of course boosts the amount of disposable income that you have. Rising income for these individuals who are rising up through the hierarchy. So these are all benefits that are enjoyed by the middle class, right? And they begin spending their money in department stores, right? So the book talks about that, credit and consumerism. Kind of pushing on through this, there's a section on labor politics and mass movements. And one of the interesting things that happens during this period of time when we're talking about political parties is really that kind of domestication, the institutionalization of change. Think about kind of the early part of the century and the sort of change that the disaffected, right, socialists, right, labor parties would have pursued through strikes, those sorts of things. And what we see during the kind of second half of the 19th century is this kind of coalition between government agencies, police forces, and then members of the middle and elite classes. And they're individuals who pursue change within the system. Right? So they're going to place a variety of inhibitions, or even prohibitions, against individuals who are trying to pursue change outside of the system, so revolutionary change, or through civil disobedience. Those things are still going to happen, right? But they are repressed very quickly by this this coalition, right, of government agencies and law enforcement. It's during the 19th century in which we're going to see the first professionalized police forces in Europe. So, individuals who are funded by, or police forces that are tax funded, members who are uniformed and are armed as well too. So these become, vehicles through which government agencies and members of the middle and elite classes can pursue and maintain peace in a city or area. Also, a section here about women's suffrage, and I believe there's a discussion board about women and suffrage. So do look at that. For those of you who don't know a lot about Judaism, Israel, and how Israel comes to be, right, the current nation state of Israel, there's a short little section on Zionism there. That's kind of an important little piece of history from the late 19th century. It talks about Theodor Herzl there, who's not the first person to talk about Zionism, but is really kind of the first person in Europe during this period of time to really kind of plant the seed that begins to grow over a 50-year period that will culminate in the founding of Israel soon after the end of World War II. Interesting character and a great advocate, and a person who knew how to use political mechanisms to push an ideal. So Zionism. And then kind of the last third or so of the chapter talks about cultural history. I think one of the more interesting, fun types of history out there. Talks about science, talks about art. So a little bit in there about Darwinian evolution, all right? That idea of modification that comes through descent, which you probably studied in high school biology, or maybe even college biology. Thing to remember about Darwin is that though he understood the kind of the concept of evolution, that idea of modification through descent, he didn't have a mechanism. He didn't know how that would happen. And that's not going to come until later in the century, in the early part of the 20th century with Mendel. I do have a discussion board that's a little more focused on social Darwinism. I think about Charles Darwin's evolutionary change. It's kind of change that happens individual by individual, right? And the sort of idea that Herbert Spencer comes up with in social Darwinism is change happening to groups, right? So change that can happen to a race or a class or a nation. And the idea is that there's that kind of idea of survival of the fittest, right? The best members of a species, right? So what social Darwinism says is that that can apply to groups, right? So as social Darwinists would use this theory, if one people, right, go to battle with another people and beat them, then that must show that the winners are a superior race or class or nation. All right. So this idea of Darwinism, Darwinian change, Darwinian survival of the fittest, that can happen at the group level. All right. So social Darwinism. And then the last section talks about modernism. So it's in the 19th century, all right, in which historians create this bifurcation, trifurcation, right, of human history into ancient era, medieval era, and modern era. And so artists, other individuals, embrace this idea of a modern era that is different from, separate from, and superior to past eras, and create new sorts of art forms, all right, that put aside reliance on traditions, that put aside reliance on representation, right, that focus on individual expression, individual creation, experimentation. So I do have a discussion board on modernism, so be sure and take a little bit of time and read through that as well too, and enjoy some images of artwork. So that's about it. Enjoy the chapter. Week 6 is our midterm, a little bit late, but you kind of get a break on writing discussion boards and essays, a bit more on that in a week. So enjoy the week.